an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Grey's Sister. Chapters 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and that's it. In these chapters, Nona has her trial, where she is supposed to be disguised and make it to a tree. Recognizing the fact that she is far too distinct to ever be in disguise, she chooses to put everyone else into disguises instead. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Martin for commissioning this episode. Martin, these chapters are super duper fun. Like, I really enjoy the high stakes of these books, don't get me wrong, but I always enjoy when the stakes are something a little bit closer to home that's a bit more relatable. And I don't like missing meals. And I understand why missing a meal would be sufficient motivation. And honestly, I really hate What's-Her-Face, but I also have a little bit of sympathy for her because she's just going to be struggling over the next few days, starving for fucking 3 days. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's start with chapter 11. Nona is still very, very sore from the beating that she took. I should mention too, that I said I go up to chapter 16. It's technically over 50 pages, but I wasn't going to stop in the middle of a chapter. I'm not a fucking lunatic. So she manages to make it to class despite having been beaten, but she does not make it on time. And this happens a couple other times as well. She eventually gets her head shaved for being late, which, look, that is a hell of a punishment, but I can't lie. I'm real bad about being on time, and that might do it. Maybe I should make a promise that if I'm late to my next thing, I'll shave my head. I can't do that. Look at this hair. What am I supposed to do? So Sister Apple says, your tardiness has volunteered you to spend your study period on third day helping me with Red class. We're brewing wretchweed. And then she starts talking about the subject of disguise. This is the sort of thing that I am convinced I would be pretty good at. There's a lot in this that I would not. I don't know about fighting. I think I'd probably be like a pretty fierce fighter, but I don't know about how skillful. I think I'd be very aggressive. But, you know, in terms of like speed or all of that, I don't think that I would particularly carry the day. But disguise is about acting, and it's about lying, and it's about convincing yourself that a lie is true, because that's what it takes to really get into a character. And that I think I could manage. And I love when she talks about Sister Pepper. She could, with nothing more than a simple gray tunic, or brown if you turned it inside out, pass convincingly at the gates of a dozen high houses and guild halls in Verity. I suspect she could have gained admittance to half of them wearing a sack. Sister Pepper knew in her heart of hearts that she belonged in each of those places. She knew who she was, why she was going, what to expect inside, and precisely how much attention to pay to those whose job it was to stop her. The body speaks its own language, and Sister Pepper could use hers to say whatever she needed it to. Now, Nona, as she's listening to this, is very aware that she is not good at any of this. She doesn't have the talent for imitation that Ruli does. She has no shadow. Her eyes are all black, as What's-Her-Face says, whose name I keep forgetting, like an insect. And overall, I mean, she is pretty fucking distinctive. Understandably, she's not really feeling super confident about this trial. Apple continues on talking about other disguises, and eventually she tests everybody, having them like come up to her and asking them to like play a character and convince her of it. The first one that has to go up is Zoli. And Zoli is not good at this. Oh, Zoli, I enjoy you, but damn, you really need to like figure out a way to lie, because you're not always going to be able to just scowl and silently beat your way through every situation. So let's see. They get interrupted, and I forgot to actually, because like so often, with these books, I wound up kind of rushing towards the end of the episode last time because there is so much to talk about and I fall behind. The last episode, I forgot to mention, I think, that the Inquisition is coming to Verity, that we wind up finding out about that, and that they're coming to the Abbey. And I just can't tell you guys the kind of horror that the idea of the Inquisition affects in me. It is truly the kind of like, it almost feels like I have no excuse to be as frightened of the idea of the Inquisition as I am, because I didn't live through it. But torture is something that, I mean, nobody likes torture, right? But I do feel that there are some people who are better able to withstand pain. And there are some people who like watching horror movies that are torture porn, as they're called, where people are being hurt and they can like stomach it. Torture for me is the kind of thing that will make me feel sick to my stomach, and not in like a vomiting way, in a like I'm starting to shake kind of way. If there are torture scenes in movies, they're very hard for me to sit through and hard for me to shake afterwards. And the concept of torture is something that like is so I hold that anybody who can torture another human being has something wrong with them. There is fundamentally something wrong and broken in them as a human being. And maybe they're not bad people, but I still maintain there's something wrong there. So the concept of the Inquisition strikes fear in me in a way that like Goebbels and the Nazis do, where it's this sick terror. The only other thing that really comes close is like medical experimentation, that kind of thing that, you know, was inflicted on Black people or Puerto Rican women. And I just, when we have them beginning to turn up in these chapters, the creepy crawly, I was just waiting for this to like come to a head somehow, and it doesn't. It's just sort of begun. We just are getting the initial sense of them invading our space. I really thought there was going to be more, and I'm like low-key glad there isn't, but I'm also convinced that because it's such a slow build, they're going to be more of a like factor like ongoing than I thought. And I hate that. I guess I hoped the announcement of the Inquisition coming was going to be similar to like the high priest. Is that what his name is? I can't remember, the bishop, when he comes to, you know, essentially torture Abbess Glass. So she puts herself on the spot, I guess, but that it would be the kind of thing that would be extremely like tense and difficult and maybe painful, but it would be over in a couple days. And instead it feels a bit much more like they have ensconced themselves and are going to be hovering and observing. And that means that they are going to be more important and harder to shake than I thought. And I'm not excited about that. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So Zoli goes up there. She does not do a good job in her lying. I live to dance. Dancing is my pleasure. Oh my God, she's so bad at it. So Sister Apple calls Nona up and wants her to convince her that she is a lord, I think, that wants to, okay, you're from House Nemesis, you're disgusted that you have to have the peasants on your land resettled if you want to site a hunting lodge on their village. And as she's about to go up and do this, this man walks in, and we wind up finding out that his name is Pelter. The fucking description of him is so good. He was perhaps 50, a narrow face, the scrawny length of his neck, the prominence of his throat, and his graying hair tufting up like the wool of a badly shorn sheep would have made him comical, if not for the brittle blueness of his eyes. Nona felt they were the eyes of a man who had witnessed horrors and approved. She sat, grateful to join the others. Ooh, she sat thinking, I don't want to be anywhere near this guy. And unfortunately, he hears her name and he decides to zero in on her. He asks Sister Apple to bring Nona to the front and do her thing that she's supposed to do. And Nona feels this guy looking at her. She felt something new, a rustling of old memories, the focus moon through the starkness of bare branches, the corridor wind through the wooden bars of a cage. And she realizes he's fucking snaping her. He's practicing. He is a legilimens using his threadwork, and she needs to practice occlumency and keep him the fuck out. And it is a difficult thing for her to do, but she manages to knock him back, and it obviously irritates him that she's able to do it. And let's see, the blue of his eyes turned to ice. His smile held only winter. Come then, girl, he said, lie to me. And it cuts from there, and I am absolutely dying to know how that wound up going. I can't believe that it cuts there. I was so mad, y'all. I really want to know. Because, like, Nona she has lied many times, right? The whole story that she tells her friends about where she's from, it's a very well done lie. And so we know that she's not bad at it, but it's a different thing because she's telling a version of what happened to her, and this is her having to pretend to be someone else, and that's very different. I just want to know how she did it. So they're talking about the Inquisition and what the hell they're even doing here. And Ruli says Scherzel sent them because of Zoli. And they then talk about Scherzel and her position regarding the Inquisition and regarding the rest of the royalty, of the nobles, essentially, and what they can and can't control, and the rules surrounding how they are able to be put on trial. This is interesting to me, even though I'm not sure I'm going to be able to keep it totally straight. I wish we met some of these characters a little bit more rather than just hearing about them, because I find it a little bit more difficult. And this is something that I ran into a lot with the Witcher books, is that when there are nobles that are simply talked about whom we don't spend very much time with, or if we spend time with them, it's like all of them having this big meeting and you have to try and keep track of them for the first time in that context. It's really difficult for me to keep it organized in my brain. So I'm going to do my best. But Ara calls Scherzel prime instigator. And says when Jacob sold her the role on his way to getting the high priesthood, it was mostly an honorary position, but her archivists dug into the scrolls and found all manner of associated rights and duties the church seemed to have forgotten about, which that is the smart way to do it, right? You get yourself where you need to be, and then you begin to be really strict with enforcing rules that are allowed for you that are kind of ignored most of the time. Or you push up against like things that are not actually laws, but are simply tradition. And that's what our government is doing right now. But, whatever. So, Ara Ara says the only place the Inquisition can hold the Lances to account is in their palaces. All the most highly placed people have rights about where they can and can't be put on trial. And apparently the fucking emperors, their line is the only one that can refuse admission to the Inquisition. So unless Crucical invites them in, the Inquisition can't touch him. Oh, how convenient. Good God. Jula says the Inquisition keeps us pure, and Nona asks who keeps them pure, which is the fucking question, Nona. Thank you for asking it. So Ara says, this is not about Zoli. This is about the gray and the red. The Emperor wants control. He wants to send the sisters against his enemies, not to have to beg High Priest Nevis. That's what my father says. The Emperor will be doing the same thing with the monasteries. They'll have inquisitors up at Narrow Path, too, trying to find fault with the abbot. Crucical will want the Red Brothers and the Grey, too. All right. Look. I know I should have known that there was another abbey with an abbot and Red Brothers and Grey Brothers. Didn't even fucking occur to me. Not even for a moment. Not even for a moment. This was like finding out about fucking Beauxbaton and Durmstrang, where you're like, fucking duh, of course Hogwarts isn't the only wizarding school, but also it just never entered your fucking head at all. I just felt like such a moron. So Nona is watching Jula sewing up a tear in her habit that she got running out of that cave. And this leads to Nona saying, we should go back to the caves. And the only person who answers Nona is Ara. And she just says, I don't want to. And nobody else even acknowledges that she said anything. It's like, as if she never spoke. It's as if anything she says that carries any link to the caves, they can't even hear. It's really weird. So she decides that she is going to do some thread work and figure out if she can get into their brains and get them to remember this. And she does this a little bit later, and it's pretty intense. So Nona tries at first to ask Jula, how did this tear? And try and just push it a little bit. And Jula just says, I caught it on something. And it says the stitching continued a little faster, a lot less neat. I need help, Kiat. It needs two people. And she's talking about the way that you can get into their heads and get the thread work done. It's going to be something that she has to kind of double her consciousness. It's the wrong word. It's a weird thing. I don't really understand why she has to do it this way. But Kiat says, think about it. You'll need two minds. Otherwise, you'll need two minds for both the silly trances you think you need. Perhaps Joelle will help you. That's her name, Joelle. I was trying to remember. So she decides that she is just going to try and do it herself. And does a double trance. And I don't understand why she needs to do a double trance. I don't understand why this is something that because it seems like regular thread work. And as far as I know, this isn't how normal thread work goes. So forgive me if I'm being dense and this has been sort of explained. I didn't feel like it was explained in this moment. Let me go back and just double check. If vengeance and pride were not enough, Yish had stole a ship heart. It had to be recovered. Where better to start than at the beginning? It seemed that time was only hardening their denial into fact. Patience would not solve the problem, and in any event, time was running out. Yeah, it just goes immediately to, you need my help, otherwise you'll need two minds. I don't understand this, but regardless, she does pull it off. It's just really fucking painful. At first, it just tires her out. And every person that she manages to sort of unknot, it's a little bit more difficult and a little less precise than it had been. I really enjoy how the response of everybody to what she has done is slightly different. She is talking to Jula first, and she is searching the threads of like where her words leave her mouth and where they land without effect on the girls. Like there seems to be almost a shield that keeps her words from landing on them. And so that's the spot that she zeroes in on. And it says, Nona understood the Holothour's work now. It had tied a knot in each girl's threads, linking the caves to the very worst and oldest of their fears, so that their minds would step around the memory of the Holothour and everything associated with it, denying its space in their thoughts. So then she undoes that knot and says we should go back. And Jula looks up and says, we should. What in ancestor's name was that thing? We should take knives, swords if we can. Jula seemed perhaps a little too enthusiastic. Nona worried she might have erased rather too much of the fear or imposed her own desires on her friend. She resolved to use a lighter touch on the others. So she does this to Ara, undoes the knot, and Ara is just like, we should be careful. Then she does Ruli, and Ruli says, I don't know, that thing that chased us, I nearly wet myself. And these are the three that she manages to work it on. But Darla, she's not hanging out with them at the time. And Nona only makes it back to her bed, like, before she kind of goes unconscious, because she has this horrific headache from trying to do this double trance. And never manages to remove the blockage from Darla. And she kind of resolves that it was so difficult and painful to do it to everybody else. The agony of it was so awful that she would rather go without Darla and have Darla not really remember than try to do it again. And there was another girl who was with them who also forgot, and they mention her a while later, but I don't remember her name, and she's not somebody that's around all the time. So Nona asks Darla at one point, we're going below tomorrow, you in? And Darla just immediately skims past what she said and talks about something else, and decides to leave it alone. And then we go to Sister Wheel. And this is a weird scene where, because Sister Wheel, I mean, she's trying to prove herself, I think, to the Inquisition, because she wants to be seen as a good teacher, because she herself is so, devout is the wrong word, pious feels more, just really fucking self-righteous, really. And she's talking about family and the bonds of family that are holy. And I like to think this is brought up here because it directly relates to what happens to Nona in the caves later. This is interesting to me. Okay, so, and I like the way it's presented too, because Sister Wheel is talking about the links that bind you to your father and mother that are repeated through the years that make the chain that meets in the ancestor. A direct connection between you and the origin of all humanity. And then she talks about why Sweet Mercy accepts children who have no family, whose parents sold them, abandoned them. And Inquisitor Pelter says a sold child belongs to the church in a way that a wanted child cannot. And Sister Wheel says the false precedence of the church's claim on children in its care over that of their parents is one of the pillars upon which the foul edifice of the Skithral heresy stands. Now, I know we've heard about the Skithral thing before, but I cannot remember when that was or what it was in reference to. So if it's important, let me know. That's the problem sometimes with doing this as I do, as far apart as I do, that I will lose things like that. And then she says, the bonds of family, holy as they are, allow any parent to withdraw their child from service at convent or monastery, even if the high priest himself should object. In Skithral, the church claims a divine right to any child in their care. That is why they must burn, to purify them of their sin. And Inquisitor Pelter says, it's why Abbess Glass buys girls. She would rather not lose control of trained novices should a father or mother demand their return. She avoids rather than defies the law. Which kind of gives Nona pause, because Abbess Glass has always said that she's free to leave. And she's realizing that maybe the church wouldn't let her the way Abbess Glass has always told her, which is an interesting question. I assume Abbess Glass would just figure out a way around the law because that's how she works. But yeah, and she's realizing also that the only other person in this place that is the same background where they've also been sold is Zoli. And her and Zoli wind up having a lot of moments in these chapters of seeing eye to eye in a way that has been slow to build, but is appreciated. I don't need her becoming such great friends with Zoli right away. Zoli is somebody who would really be distrustful of people who would hang back and take a while to establish how she feels about somebody. So I'm fine with this. So I think, and what I was saying about the link between this and what happens later, I think this is the author talking about the bonds of family and then pointing to the fact that Nona has created her own family that is also in its way to her holy, and that the power of that, the family that she has chosen for herself, is there is a power to it that is sacred, And when I said I liked how this was set up, I really like it being set up that Sister Wheel tries to talk about, parents and their links to you and all of that as being super important, because Sister Wheel is such a traditionalist. And there are so many people in the world still who seem to believe that no matter how shittily your family treats you, they're your family and you should endure that and you should forgive them. And I just think that's horseshit. I mean, there is nobody who can damage you like family can. And removing yourself from family that treats you like that is, in my opinion, simply the smart thing to do, right? That is just how you should be taking care of yourself. And it's always astonishing to me when people seem to be when they seem to be sort of judgmental about others cutting someone out of their lives who is family. I don't understand that. Blood doesn't mean anything. It doesn't, it really doesn't. All blood is who you grew up around. And that isn't just being born to a group of people. They should still have to earn your loyalty to them. It feels way too entitled to think that because somebody was born to you that they owe you something, Anyway, I just really enjoy how much friendship and her opinion of honor and how seriously she takes that keeps playing into the story, and that comes up over and over again. So I really like this too. Zoli says something about their faith, and Nona says, you should really say our faith because the fucking Inquisition is here, girl. So be a little bit more careful about it. And Nona asks Zoli if she goes ice ranging, if she's going to run away. Zoli says, would you run with me? I'm told the Chosen One should not abandon her shield. I thought you had murder in mind, a revenge, a ship heart to recover. We will visit the ice together, Nona. I will show you another world and how to live in it. Nona met the ice triber's gaze, surprised. I'd like that. And for the briefest moment, she could swear she saw a smile tug at Zoli's lips. So, Nona explains to her friends a little bit about what happened with the caves erasing their memory of things, because Darla's acting real weird every time they bring it up. So Ruli finally is like, what's going on with her? And she has to explain. She doesn't tell them completely about how it worked or the thread work she did, but generally, the way that Hetty is the name of the other girl. There it is. Because I was just like, I know there was another one, but she's not somebody who's consistently in their group of friends. So they are talking about like going out there, and the fact that they saw all of these like skeletons that were on the ground. Once we actually deal with this thing, it turns out there were a couple skeletons, but most of them were part of an illusion or a hallucination or something. This Holothour is really interesting. I have to finish talking about what happens here before I can really get into it. But so I'm going to jump into that because there's a lot of stuff packed into these chapters. First of all, Sister Apple tells Nona that they are going to be giving her the test, the shade trial in the cloisters, which is not how it normally works. Normally they give this test out in like a public square so that there's a little bit more opportunity to sneak in and there's more variety of people and you are able to practice a wider variety of disguises. Fucking Nona gets really, really angry about this and begins to talk about Wheel and that bitch Rail. And Sister Apple slaps Nona across the face and tells her that she made the decision because the Noigwin still want their revenge and she's going to be putting Kettle and other people at risk if she tries to leave the property. So yeah, we're doing this. It's not as if you stand a chance. You cut off your shadow, Nona. You cut yourself off from the shade. The gray isn't for you. And she says this in a very absolute way, which, I mean, obviously, it is kind of true. She manages to pass the test, but it's not because of her, like, having the skill to do what is required for shade. And I'm not exactly sure that what she did was clearly allowed because as it turns out, Apple saw the whole thing and was keeping track of it all, but it's not shade work, you know? But then we go to the caves. So we have the journey in, all of them, you know, growing more tense as they get closer in and eventually using their serenity to sort of insulate themselves from the effects of the fear that overcomes them as they get further and further in. And then all of a sudden, I think Ruli says it's coming. Every fear she owned hurtled towards her out of the night at terrifying speed. In a moment, Nona hung high above herself, seeing her body in the small patch of illumination. And Nona feels like this urge to run that is practically somebody screaming run into her ear. It's not Kiat, because Kiat had told her to run last time. This is like a whole other, it's almost like part of the enchantment of this creature. It was the sound of running feet that told her to flee, the sound of being abandoned. And I really like that obviously is a particular fear of Nona's, and that is this moment for her of terror. It makes total sense. So they all begin to run, and Ara is running blind because I think somebody dropped the lantern, And she goes straight into a wall at such speed that she kind of knocks herself out. And this moment really fucking killed me. Kiat fled into her eyes, and suddenly the passage ahead revealed itself to her as if the stone itself were glowing with a reddish light. "Run!" The voice that filled her brain rang with terror as the Holothour's fear infected even the devil. "It's an old one, too powerful." "She's my friend." The words brought Nona to a halt, as effectively as a rope around her neck. She turned. Ara moved her head, groaning, the lantern lying on its side close to her hip. "Take the lantern and run!" So Nona turns and heads in, and it takes all of this strength. It's described as like she's going up against a headwind, like she has to like bend and force her way forward. And her fear had gone. It wasn't that her fear had gone, simply that a greater one drove her. The thought of Ara's bones lying with the rest, slowly devoured by stone, a constant, silent accusation that the foundation of her own existence lay as hollow as the rock of faith. So Nona goes in, and she continues to say no as this thing urges her to run. And I love this so much. At the back of her head, Kaot hung, bleeding out into the air, trying to free himself from her skin and flee back to the path. Look. When a fucking devil is too afraid of a thing to keep occupying the body it has possessed, that convinces me that shit's serious. I don't care for that at all. Warm blood ran from Nona's eyes and nose. She sank to her knees beneath the weight of it, every nerve screaming to run. The rocks around her began to bleed. An awful, rasping breath shuddered through the blackness. And out there, a howling hate, condensing, a darker clot of night. The stench of decay surrounded her. Screams of pain worse than the abbess had made when they'd burned her. A novice emerged into the trembling illumination, thin limbs, rotting skin, dragging a withered leg, lifting up her face. "Hessa! Run!" "No." A whisper. And suddenly the fear blew out. From one moment to the next it had gone. The darkness was again just darkness. Nona fell forward onto all fours and vomited everything she had in her. I really liked this. This was like if you took Dementors and leveled them up. You know, a Dementor it's interesting in its way because it's trying to consume something from you. And what's so weird about the Holothour is Dementors are trying to chase you and come at you. A Holothour seems to want to send you away, but also in like by making you so terrified with illusion and stuff. I wonder if it just feeds on fear and it enjoys that, and that's why in like causing people to flee is something that it seems to want to do. But basically, Nona tells it, "You're not as scary as how much I care about my friend." Like, if we're going to weigh each of those things, being afraid for the life of my friend is much more terrifying than your ass. Which, honestly, I'm totally 1,000% here for it. I really, really liked this whole thing. And I was startled at the fact that it's like when it says the darkness was just darkness, suddenly the fear blew out. I thought that was only going to be for Nona, that she overcame this thing, and for her, she was able to like go back for her friend. But then it breaks, and the next section that starts is Jula and Ruli coming back, and apparently the thing is gone for everyone. Somehow Nona standing up to it made it just vanish, which I just really didn't think that's how that was going to go. And Ruli asks, "Where is it?" And Chaos in her head says, that was it. Holothour have nothing so primitive as flesh. So it's a weird thing when Kiat says that. He isn't really like answering the question. He says that was it. But does that mean that the Holothour is just like defeated and gone, or did it flee? I assume it's defeated, but I wish I understood more about how this works. So yeah, they realized that the skeletons were part of it, that was like, there's one, but the rest were illusion. And there is this weird ring that is upright, sort of like a portal. And it has all of these like carvings all over it. And there are stalagmites and stalactites decorating it because it's been sitting there for like literally tens of thousands of years, which is pretty cool. And I don't know what this thing is, but I am deeply curious. I really want to know, because they wind up they explore this a little bit more. And they find all, like, basically, I think it's pronounced an oubliette. Is that how you say that? Oubliette? I don't know. They are finding areas that it seems the Abbey used to use to put people, to forget about them. A prison. But a prison implies more humanity than what these people seemed to have had. There is just an emptiness here, and they are stuck there and then left. And I guess they're fed? I don't know. I would think that if they weren't fed, there's easier ways to do this and you could just execute them. But I don't know. It's a weird, nobody really seems to know what the deal is here with these cells, and they're super old. That like bars are just coated in rust. Like when one of them touches it, their hand just gets covered in it. And Nona says they might not have been people who came into the skeletons we found might not have been people who came into the caves and got lost. They might have been novices or sisters who escaped the cells but never saw the light again. Eventually, they find a pool fed by a stream that's escaping from a crack, and they're looking into the reflection of the light's reflection on the rocky ceiling made a wonder of slowly shifting patterns. And they see a bucket hanging into the shaft. And Jula says that it's the well in the back of the laundry. They get washing water there when the rain barrels are dry. And then Nona realizes that the people down here who were imprisoned might have actually heard folks living their lives and doing laundry up in the far reaches of these caves. And it's almost worse than being completely cut off from everybody. Having this tiny little flicker of a reminder of the outside world and people right above you being able to continue going on as if you aren't down here wasting away. And she wonders if anybody in the convent even remembers that it exists. And I am super curious about that. So Abbess Glass is chapter 14. And she has this like moment with Sister Tallow, who is warning her that the Inquisitors are going to want to read the Grey reports. I am deeply curious about what it is here. I feel like I'm supposed to know. And I assume that the Grey reports are probably to do with Sister Kettle and what's going on there. Well, no. Well, yeah, because she's Grey, right? Because she does shadow work. So I assume Sister Tallow is like saying you could get in touch with Nevis and make sure that the Grey reports are taken away from here before they're able to, get their hands on anything. But Abbess Glass says sometimes you have to let your opponent get a good tight grip before you can use it against them. The Derns are landing again in force. The Skithral armies are at both their borders, though more of them at the one we care about. The ice has advanced another mile since last year's ranging on both fronts. The Emperor is squeezed on all sides. All we need now, as they say, is for the moon to fall. And this is when Sister Tallow says that Pelter is a threat to Kettle, and that they need to figure out what they are going to do about her, because if Pelter grabs her up, Apple is going to go fucking bonkers. And she says that it won't be pretty, which I'm like, I would love to see what she would do to somebody. But she says, the things I've set in motion, the uncertainties, I need Kettle here. She's my reserve. And her condition is a good excuse to keep her close. It's her condition that will see Pelter take her off to the Tower of Inquiry in chains. The operative word is see. He will not see her. She will remain hidden, but close. So we do see her a little bit later, like watching over, well, not specifically watching over Nona, but she appears to be watching Nona at one point. And I love this moment where she complacently is like, the shade trial for Nona in the cloister, she'll fail at it. Everybody has to fail, and it'll be good for her to fail. And then it turns out that is not what happens at all. I don't think, like, because she's saying it'll be good for her to fail at something, as if Nona's getting too used to winning all the time, and I don't feel like she understands Nona's mindset. Nona is just like, she doesn't see what she's going through as a series of wins the way that outsiders seem to see it. So I think Abbess is like acting like she might be getting above herself, and you know, we're in her head and we know that's not remotely what's happening. But and then we have a moment where we hear about like hundreds of people that are massing and talking about how they want to see the Argatha, that they are hungry, and Abbess Glass like talks about tactically distributing food to people in certain areas where they'll associate getting that food with leaving. And then in the end, Brother Pelter stood at the doorway to the Ancestor's dome, letting the ice wind gust past him into the foyer while he stared at the Abbess's house. Come along, brother. Abbess Glass set her fingers to the cold panes before her in their leaded diamonds. Play your part. And I'm just like, what does that mean? So, let's jump ahead here, because I only have about 10 minutes left. Nona first has a lesson with Zoli, and she is like she is at the library here taking notes on Saint David, who was like an explorer. And she gets so caught up in this that she winds up being late to blade class, which means that she gets her head shaved. Honestly, it seems to barely even matter to her that she's getting her head shaved. Like, she really just does not seem fazed by it in particular, other than the fact that it's Joelle that's going to do it to her. So, props to this girl for being like the least vain character I've ever read, because I would just be horrified and heartbroken. I would react much more like Ara than she does. So she and Zoli are like paired up and are fighting without mercy. And Nona is noticing that she's less afraid of Zoli than usual, because she's so worried about getting her head shaved and just, you know, Joelle having a fucking razor blade in her hand, that she winds up fighting a little bit more bravely and with a little less hesitation. And Sister Tallow eventually says, good. And it says, Mistress Blade used the G word so rarely that the moment required witnessing. And Nona looks up and realizes that Zoli's habit has some blood on it, and then looks down and realizes that she has two injuries, similar injuries on herself. So some shit, they're beginning to actually injure each other. And they go so fast. They are really basically creating such a spectacle that all of the other novices, they aren't even able to move. And fucking Nona and Zoli have already completed 6 parry thrust combinations. So I really just like this moment because she and Zoli are both smiling at each other, and there's this sort of camaraderie here. I just really love the slow build of a friendship between the two of them, because they are very alike in their ways, and I don't know. I'm here for this, and I am interested to see what Zoli is like once you get to know her a little bit better. So she gets her head shaved, and there is a moment where Joelle is just kind of fucking with her about Yisht and your little peasant friend will have to go unrevenged. And Nona thrusts her head back to try and get Joelle to cut her so that she can justify getting her in trouble or hitting her. But Joelle is completely prepared for that. And it's just you're real predictable, I didn't even have to there's no need for me to be fast if you're going to do exactly what I know you're going to do, which I hope Nona internalizes that lesson because it is important. So now let's go to chapter 16. This is the actual test. So Nona first has Darla practice throwing her. And all of this is, by the way, dropped on the reader without any information as to why she wants this. But you have to guess it has to do with the plan that she's formulating for passing her shade trial. And let's see. She chose her. She ran to her chosen spot 10 yards back into the wind. I'm going to help you. Put your hands like this down low. I'll run at you, step into your hands, and you boost me over your head. That's insane. You said you'd help me out, but what's this for? Can't tell you. Conflict of interest. I'm protecting you. Do we have to do it this far back? What if you fall short? If I fall short, then I'll probably hurt myself. Can't we start closer? We are starting closer. Next time we'll add 5 yards. And there's only so many times I want to jump in today. And I really enjoy that Darla agrees with this. Their friendship. Darla, you know who I keep thinking of? If you guys watch Gravity Falls, Darla is Grenda. And I mean, Nona certainly isn't fucking Mabel, but Darla, that's who I always picture in my head when I'm picturing Darla. Nona landed 2 yards behind her, the force of the impact, concertinaing her into a tight hunch about folded legs. They repeated the move 4 times. And then she backs off 10 yards, strips off both shoes and range coat, and places them in the lee of a boulder. And I was like, oh, really? What's up here? Then she goes to Ruli and wants Ruli to steal a tub of kelp juice. And what it turns out she's using this for is to fertilize the roots of this tree so that it begins to, so that it has leaves by the time she does her, because otherwise she can't hide in the tree. So I love this so much. She winds up sneaking out in the middle of the night, and she pours this fucking stanky juice. And I love that Kettle stops her and is like, what are you up to? And she says nothing good. And Kettle's like, oh, well then, please continue. And we have a bunch of moments of Nona getting herself caught because she is given 7 days to try to complete this trial. The way this goes normally is that they The trial was held in Verity on 7 days, and each candidate got to try her luck across a whole 7-day from dawn to dusk, with the 6th fail ending the matter. Since the novice cloisters were all but deserted on a 7-day, Nona had managed to get Sister Apple to agree that she might try at any non-lesson time between breakfast and dinner, 1 attempt per day, for the 6 days leading up to the 7-day. If she hadn't succeeded by dinner on 6th day, then the trial was over and she had failed. This meant, of course, that none of those on guard duty could get lunch without weakening the defense. I have to think that this is fucking on purpose, because she's making sure that they can't have lunch, and then their loss leads to them not being able to eat later. It turns out to, like, I should mention, that there's a different, like, penalty. I think that if the person succeeds, they lose lunch, or they don't lose lunch, they lose meals entirely, I think, for 3 days. And if they make a false challenge on somebody who turns out to not be the novice trying to get in, they lose 1 meal, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to find the spot, but I can't find like the exact spot where they give you that information. So she also like gets a net and puts that into position. And there's a bunch of things like that she sets in place here. I really like that she finds out that Kiat is like, reacts to being dunked in ice cold water and retreats in a way that might be advantageous to her later. I assume that's going to come into play somehow. So I just really enjoy the whole setup. It feels very heist-like, you know? And when she wakes up in the morning, she's sneezing. She has a cold from being in like the freezing cold fucking water. And is walking around in a wet habit. And this winds up being a little bit of a problem because she keeps sneezing, and this, you know, in a very like horror movie moment where you're hiding from the murderer behind your couch, but you suddenly get the urge to sneeze. She winds up making a deal with Kiat that she will kill somebody in exchange for Kiat keeping her from sneezing, which I have to assume there are better ways, but I guess she couldn't think of anything in the moment. So she goes up to the roof with Darla, and it turns out that the vaulting lessons she was having with Darla are to vault her from the roof onto the top of the tree, and the top of the tree is covered by a net. So she's not just going to be impaled by branches. There is a net that is going to hopefully catch her and keep her from like falling too far into the branches that she'll get hurt. And when they get to the roof and look down on the tree, it's very, very green in a way that it definitely had not been the evening before. So there had been like a bunch of sort of buds, but they weren't open yet. And she has managed to get them to unfurl. So what she has also done is get a bunch of her friends to help her. And that's what I love about this. We have how important her friends are, that she like just takes a stand against this fucking Holothour. But then she also employs them to get this challenge completed. And she couldn't have done it without all of her friends. They each play a very specific role. And her eyes being a very distinctive all black, Ara is really good at mastering shade and pulls the darkness up into her eyes so that her eyes look similar. And, you know, the girls all do and that keeps her from having a shadow also. There's all this stuff that her friends do to distract Joelle and her gang. So they make a bunch of false challenges and they lose because she manages to get into the tree, and there's like, the challenge is you get to the tree. There's a puzzle box, which you're supposed to climb the tree and get, and you're supposed to open it. And nobody has ever been able to open the thing before. I will admit, I kind of saw this coming, because when she finds the puzzle box and it turns out that there's like 6 locks on it, and one of them, like, she pulls and the other one she pulls, and it'll relock the first one or the third. I really was like, I bet that shit doesn't even open. I bet that's like either not a box at all, or it's the kind of thing that you like. There are certain quote puzzles that the thing is you just have to smack the sides of it really hard or something and it pops open. It's not about like figuring it out. It's about brute force. And I find those to be kind of a cheat. And it turns out it's just solid all the way through the middle. And I love all of the things that everybody contributes to this mission. You know, Ruli is the one that made the replacement box for her so that the other novices wouldn't notice that it was missing. Everybody does their part. But yeah, she promises to kill Yisht, and that is her exchange. She like tells Kia, I will choose who I kill. And Kiat's like, you should kill Ruli, I think. Or maybe Rula, did she say? Let me go back. You should kill the one called Jula. Yisht. I'll kill Yisht. That's what it is. And Jolie is like so sure that Nona's lying because the box still looks like it's sitting there. And Apple, it turns out, is fucking hiding under the tree and was able to go totally undetected, even though she was right fucking there the entire time. And she says, in order to be finished, you would have to have opened the box, and that sounds unlikely. And I love how she says that, because she's saying it because she knows it can't be opened. You know, it's not, you think that she's saying that because it's never been done before, but she knows it can't be opened. So that's why she's saying it that way. It's a difficult box to open, Sister Apple smiled. Nona flattened her palms out a fraction, and the puzzle box fell into 4 sections along the lines that her claw blades had cut through it. The thing was a solid block of bone with no space inside. Is that open enough? So, yeah, Joelle and her friends are going to go hungry for like a fucking week, and that is brutal. I am over time. But yeah, these were really fun chapters. I just really like how many like weird challenges are in these books, and I feel like that's something that I could see getting old for people, but not for me. I like these things. So thank you very much to Martin for commissioning this. I'm looking forward to the next chapters, and I hope you guys are enjoying listening. I will see you soon. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.